You are listening to Middle East Monitor Conversations, bringing you lively discussions with prominent voices from the region and beyond, as we delve deeper into issues shaping the Middle East and North Africa, from politics, the culture, and the arts.
Hello and welcome to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor with me, Nasim Ahmed, your host for today. We are discussing a new report this week exposing state and corporate complicity with Israel's military onslaught on Gaza. The report was issued by the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations, abbreviation is SOMO, earlier this week. I have with me two of the leading experts who have contributed and authored the report, Lydia de Leeuw and Misa Norigami. Welcome to the show, Lydia and Misa.
Thank you.
So Lydia has been leading SOMO's strategic litigation work, connecting SOMO's research work to collaborations amongst various organizations, legal groups, and lawyers in a network approach to strategic litigation. Before joining SOMO, in 2015, Lydia conducted legal and field research for a variety of human rights organizations in the Middle East and South Africa. And Misa is a corporate researcher at SOMO. She investigates companies, finances, ownership, investors, corporate and capital structures, subsidiaries, and supply chains through the counter. Through the counter basically means pro bono corporate research help desk for activists. Before I get into our conversation, I think your report really taps into an ongoing theme, which is, of course, the complicity with Israeli aggression on Gaza. Israel would not be able to prosecute its war without the support of its key allies. This has taken many forms, from diplomatic cover at the UN, various international institutions, ICJ, ICC, domestically cracking down on critics of Israel and passing new laws, which cracks down on protesters. We've seen that in the US, also in the UK and other countries. And most deadly of all, of course, is the supply of weapons to the Israeli military. The bomb that struck the Palestinian refugee camp over the weekend in Rafah was a US-made missile. And SOMO has made its contribution and analyzed a specific aspect of the complicity and this with the Israeli aggression, which is namely the supply of jet fuel, without which, let's be honest, Israel would not be able to conduct its military campaign. So we'll get into the details of the report, but before we discuss that, Lydia, if you can tell our viewers and readers a bit about SOMO and the work it has been carrying out since its founding in 1973.
Yes, thank you very much, Nasim. Thank you for having us on this podcast. A little bit about SOMO. So yes, we've been around for 50 years. SOMO is a research organization that looks at the impacts and responsibilities of multinational corporations worldwide. SOMO is based in Amsterdam, but we work globally with partner groups. We also provide corporate research upon request through the counter, which you referred to earlier. This is also how the ball started rolling on our jet fuel research. It was request from the outside asking us to look into the supply chain. Our areas of research are very broad. It ranges from trade and investment policies to supply chains in the pharma industry, agriculture, but also supply chains in the context of armed conflict. So we have been doing research into the involvement of multinational corporations in Palestine for approximately 10 years now, with partner organizations, mainly with Al-Haq, or including with Al-Haq. And yes, since 7 October, I would say that our investigative work on corporate involvement in Palestine has only increased for obvious reasons. Many requests come in for corporate research on this topic via the counter. So yes, we are we are doing research on an ongoing basis and intend to be releasing more on this in the coming months.
And again, to Lydia, why specifically did you focus on jet fuel? There's so many other ways of aiding and supporting. I mentioned a few, but you could have looked at other material which is delivered to the Israeli army that is being used, non-military, of course, that is being used to support the war. So why specifically jet fuel?
I would say that jet fuel is one of the first ones we are now publishing about. It's not the only one we're looking into. We have been looking at other sectors too, and they could be dual use products as well. Jet fuel is something that came our way, and we thought we would add a value by looking into it, publishing on it, and also giving the legal analysis. So what does this involvement mean? Because it might not necessarily be obvious to anyone how this qualifies legally speaking. In addition to that, we really want to see where does SOMO add value. For example, investigation on the arms industry, so weapons that are being supplied. There's, I would say, a big group of experts, so civil society experts that have the expertise and are looking into that. So that's not where we think our value is the most. Yeah, there are some other areas that we're looking into, but no conclusion yet.
I mean, you did hit the nail on the head there, because I have read so many other reports on the supply of weapons and various other forms of complicity, but not one which is specific to jet fuel. And I think that's an important report which you managed to get out. But Misa, can you just set the terrain for us in terms of the demand for jet fuel within Israel? Who are the key suppliers? Is Israel capable of producing its own jet fuel? And what is the volume of jet fuel that's being supplied to Israel?
Yeah, so I can start by describing what's the volume that has been supplied to Israel. In our report, we have focused on mainly from US and also from EU countries, possibly from EU countries, but also from Israel itself, for sort of domestic production. So in terms of supply, we identify that US is definitely the biggest suppliers of the military jet fuel. So yeah, Lydia mentioned dual use. But for the US one, it's pretty obvious that there is a military jet fuel being supplied from the US. And especially since October 2023, we, not only us actually, earlier this year, another organization called Data Desk, they conducted a research for a non-profit organization called Oil Change International, and they've already identified 3 shipments of JP8, so that's the military jet fuel to the US. And we, in addition to that, we identified 3 more since March 2024. So that's 6 shipments in total. And for the 3, like the earlier one identified by Data Desk, each delivery carried around 300,000 US barrels of this military jet fuel. And for the latter 3 that we have identified since March 2024, although we still haven't had the data on the volume of the military jet fuel, but we're pretty sure that the military jet fuel is carried in these journeys.
Does Israel produce any jet fuel of its own? Is it capable of doing that?
Yes. So Israel has 2 oil refineries that are capable to produce jet fuel by itself. One, it's owned by Bazan Limited, it's an Israeli company, and another one is owned by Ashdod Refinery Limited. But Israel relied heavily on imported crude oil. So Israel has its own capacity to produce its crude oil, but it also relies heavily on the import of crude oil. So the oil is imported from countries like Azerbaijan, and then come to these refineries, and then Israel is capable of producing military jet fuel by itself as well.
So Lydia, I mean, Misa gave us a nice background to Israel's capacity and also the amount of jet fuel that's being supplied. But even though Israel produces its own jet fuel, I think your report suggests that there is no way Israel would be able to conduct its military campaign without the supply of jet fuel from America and elsewhere. Israel just doesn't produce enough. Am I right in saying that? Is that the conclusion of your report, that without US supplied jet fuel and jet fuel from other areas, Israel would not be able to prosecute its war?
Yeah, based on the evidence that we have found, our conclusion is that it is impossible for Israel to sustain its military operations without the import of both jet fuel and crude oil, given that it simply doesn't have enough crude oil of its own, therefore wouldn't be able to produce domestically. So it has to rely on import of crude oil and military jet fuel. And what we find very telling is the huge amount of jet fuel that is being imported from the US alone. So we have seen over 2023 the import of 1.5 million barrels of kerosene-type jet fuel from the US to Israel. And in addition to that, we found over 2023, we found contracts to Valero, which is the provider of this JP8 fuel from the side of the US, that those contracts all added up, just for 2023 alone, added up to 2 million barrels of JP8, so military jet fuel. And that might not be all, that might not even be capturing all of the supply that is coming from the US. And also, furthermore, we see that it is a very steady and reliable supply coming from the US. So it has been ongoing for years, and it has been raised as an issue before. It was in 2023 during the military offensive of Israel on the Gaza Strip in that spring or summer, that Amnesty International specifically said that this supply of jet fuel must be stopped. They even named Valero as the provider of the JP8 fuel. So there's a long history to this supply chain, which apparently makes it an important and constant factor that is providing material support to the Israeli army. Yes.
And Mr. Give us a sense of the level of course, the volume, which is fueling the conflict and the death and destruction we see in Gaza. So, how many airstrikes have been carried out? I think your report covers that to give an indication of the devastation that's caused and the volume of jet fuel that's required for the Israeli jets to fly over Gaza. How many airstrikes did the Israeli Air Force carry out since start of 7 October up till now?
Yeah, it's obviously quite challenging to calculate the exact amount that jet fighters need to carry out airstrikes. But so far, we know that from October to December 2023 alone, Israeli Air Force carried out 10,000 airstrikes across Gaza, and those airstrikes included Israeli fighter jets dropping approximately 2,000 bombs on the Gaza Strip, and an area the size of Las Vegas or 1/4 the size of London, which is huge. And these bombs, which are dropped on densely populated areas, can kill or wound people over 1,000 feet away from the point of impact. And more than 36,000 Palestinians have been killed in the ongoing military campaign so far, and the majority of whom are women and children. So that's kind of the scale that we are facing at this moment.
So other than the US, what other private firms are supplying? I think you mentioned a few. I mean, is there a large number of suppliers, or is it very specific to a number of companies that are supplying jet fuel to Israel? Misa?
Yeah, so in our report, we identified mainly 4 companies that we can, that we identified as suppliers of jet fuels. The first one is Valero Energy. I think we mentioned it several times already, but it's a US energy company, and it has been one of the top 100 suppliers of jet and diesel fuel to the US military. And it has been, a long supplier to jet fuel to Israel as well. And in 2023, Valero generated quite amount of huge revenue, which is US $144 billion. So it's a huge company. And why we identify Valero is because there is a website, it's a US government website where you can go and find out the contracts that were awarded to specific companies to carry out some contract obligations instructed by the US government. And we found that Valero was awarded in 2023 and 2023 alone, Valero was awarded US $0.5 billion to deliver 149 million gallons of JP8 as part of the foreign military sales system. It's a US government system which allows Israel to procure this military supplies from US companies. But yeah, Valero was one of the companies that was awarded, and specifically on JP8. So that's Valero Energy. And another company, it's Overseas Ship Holding Company. So I think in the beginning I mentioned that we identify some vessels carrying this military jet fuel. So these vessels are, their names are Overseas Santorini and Overseas Suncoast, and these are owned by this company called Overseas Ship Holding Group. And they participate in one of the US government tanker security, it's called Tanker Security Program. So it's US program to allow US government to use private vessels in like military missions. And this company, Overseas Ship Holding Group, they have a contract with government of Israel directly. And so basically the government of Israel charter their vessels to deliver these fuels from the US to Israel. So that's the second company. And I think it's noteworthy to mention that this second company that I mentioned will soon be taken over by a US private company called Saltchuk Resources. So yeah, I think for folks who are interested in, it's worth investigating. Third company and fourth company are Israeli companies that are in charge of the refineries that I mentioned. So Ashdod Refinery Limited and Bazan Limited. So these two companies, because Israel only has two refineries to produce, to be able to refine the crude oil to jet fuel, and these two companies are responsible for the domestic refinery.
Lydia, if I could just ask, I mean, it's a relevant question. The Houthis, of course, have imposed a blockade on the Red Sea. So has that disrupted the supply of jet fuel by these companies in the US? Have they had to divert these vessels through another area? Did your research look into that, or can you shed some light on that?
Our research did not look into the possible impact of the of the Red Sea developments on this particular shipment, but I think that the geography of the supply chain would suggest that it doesn't affect that at all. It sails directly from the US to the south of Spain, where these two vessels, the Overseas Suncoast and Overseas Santorini, they dock in either Gibraltar or in that's UK territory, but on the south of Spain, or in Algeciras, which is also south of Spain, and then it moves on to Ashkelon port in Israel. So we think that at least this supply chain isn't affected. But it might be different for other companies that might have an involvement, but we haven't looked into that.
Let's turn attention to some of the legal terrain you're report covered, Lydia. So under international law, what are the obligations of private companies and states supplying jet fuel to a country which is in the midst of a war, which many will say is now genocide? So what are the legal obligations for these companies under international law, Lydia?
Yes, so under international law, companies and their executives, they can be held liable, criminally liable, civilly liable, for their role, their contribution in the commission of war crimes by others, or other violations of international criminal law. That has happened in the past. This started in after the Second World War. You had the Nuremberg Tribunal. There was conviction of corporate executives for their delivery of supplies to the Nazi regime, and this has continued, since. So corporate executives and companies have been held liable for their contribution, their aiding and abetting of war crimes and other violations of international law, international criminal law. So that is also how we looked at the involvement of the companies in our report. Does their contribution potentially meet the threshold of criminal liability or legal liability? And broadly speaking, I mean, there's a whole lot more nitty-gritty legal analysis to it, but the two main components that you would need to be looking at to establish whether or not there might be legal liability is the knowledge that the company has about the effects and the impacts or the likely impact of their contribution on crimes. And second is, what is the actual contribution? So the contribution, the legal test is basically, does the contribution have a substantial effect on the commission of the crime? And when it comes to jet fuel, the questions that we ask is, does this supply of jet fuel by an individual company, does it change the capability or the ability of the Air Force to carry out these airstrikes? For example, I think we can argue that there's an increased capacity to conduct more airstrikes, more widely target civilians and civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, as we have been seeing reported steadily by and well documented by human rights organizations, human rights experts. Secondly, when you look at the knowledge, the question is, does the company or executive know, or should it know, that their conduct has a reasonable likelihood of contributing to war crimes in the Gaza Strip? So first, the question is, do they know, are there war crimes being committed in the Gaza Strip, and do they know of this? Well, I think the documentation is limitless. There have been applications for arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, including for alleged war crimes and extermination and persecution. And the ICJ provisional measures, they warn of the risk of genocide or potentially genocide being committed in Gaza. Which brings me to my second point on states. States have an obligation under the Genocide Convention to prevent genocide and to employ all measures reasonable and available to them to achieve that effect. And we argue that one of the things they should be doing is ensure that the supply of crude oil and jet fuel to Israel under the current circumstances must be stopped, because there's simply too high a risk that this supply provides the means necessary for continued military operations, which could potentially be amounting to a genocide. And when it comes to drawing conclusions about the involvement of Valero, Overseas Shipholding Group, and the Israeli domestic companies involved, based on the evidence that and the analysis that we've done, the facts available to us, we think it is likely that the contribution provided by Valero and by Overseas Shipholding Group amounts to be having a substantial effect on the commission of the crime, that their supply of JP8 fuel has been so reliable, consistent, and of such a size that we think it is in fact making a substantial contribution to the acts perpetrated by the Israeli Air Force, which we argue, includes war crimes. And again, like we say in our report, there's every reason to believe that the companies and the executives are aware of where their JP8 supply ends up and how it is being used. Valero has even seen protests at their headquarters over this supply chain in April. And Overseas Shipholding Group is directly contracted by the Israeli government. So there should be little question as to their knowledge of where this JP8 supply ends up.
And of course, this raises a whole new question about double standards, because there are a number of cases where, as your report highlights, where private companies and individuals have been prosecuted for complicity in this manner. So, for example, there's a Dutch businessman who was convicted of complicity in war crime for selling chemicals to Saddam Hussein, that chemical against the Kurds, and a French company who supplied, I think, raw materials for ISIS, Daesh, and producing chemicals. So there is precedent for that in recent history, but the question has always been application of the law when it comes to Israel, and I think it'd be quite difficult to apply the law in an equal, in a fair way. Is it something you fear as well? Because you have highlighted a number of companies, you have highlighted the level of complicity that's going on. But do you also have any thoughts on how the international legal system will use the examples you cited to prosecute Israel? Will they be able to do that? Is that something you think about, Lydia?
I think about this a lot. Thank you for the question, Nassim. I think the double standards have been very much exposed. If they weren't already exposed before 7 October, then they definitely have been exposed since. I think there's two main challenges. One is the double standards, so that we're not holding companies and states involved in sustaining the military assault on Gaza to account. That is one challenge. The other challenge is that where we do see international law functioning as it should, so for example, this issuing of provisional measures by the ICJ, that there is no adequate enforcement or let's say effort by the so-called international community to put those measures into effect. I think it's an uphill battle to promote accountability. But I do believe, I have a firm belief that it is only a matter of time until we see accountability being done in relation to Israel-Palestine, including the corporates involved. But it's something for which we have to keep advocating very strongly. I do see the political tide turning. One example of that is that of course it's too little, it's too late, but the fact that the European Union is now putting up for discussion the EU-Israel Association Agreement is something unprecedented, is something that if you had told me a year ago that this would be happening, I would have said this is absolutely, it's impossible. It's not going to happen in the near future. This doesn't stop or prevent the killing in Gaza at the moment. So we do have to keep up our efforts. And I think what we are doing through this research, together with partners as well, it's building up this record of knowledge, of truth. And ultimately, there has to be and there will be accountability. Although I think everyone will agree that it will be too little, too late.
Yes, I mean, we have reasons to be optimistic. I mean, if someone told us 7-8 months ago that there would be a arrest warrants for Netanyahu and also an ICJ case over Israel, I don't think many of us would have believed that.
No.
To end on a final point, Misa, can you just give us a list of immediate recommendations that you are making, the report's making, again, for states and also for private companies? What are the key recommendations? Misa, sorry, did you?
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch one.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Yeah. First to the states, including EU, regional governments like EU, we have 3 recommendations, which is first to impose an oil and fuel embargo on Israel, first and foremost, and prevent vessels carrying oil or fuel designated for Israel for docking in the ports. As Lydia mentioned, they go through different ports before arriving in Ashkelon. So, and those are European ports. So yeah, a third recommendation is impound vessels within their territory found to be carrying fuel designated for Israel and otherwise prevent them from using their territory in any way. And second call is for all companies and shipping sectors conduct heightened due diligence throughout their business activities and business relations in order to identify and prevent contributions to human rights violations in Gaza by immediately discontinuing any involvement in oil or jet fuel supply to Israel. As we have discussed, for example, the US companies, we are quite sure that they are aware of their involvement. So this is our recommendation to them. And also immediately suspend commercial relationships with actors known or suspected to be contributing to atrocities in Gaza. And the last recommendation is for UN Special Rapporteurs, the UN Working Group on Business Human Rights and other international experts, is to investigate the role of oil and jet fuel supply in the commission of crimes under international law in Gaza and issue recommendations to states and companies with a view to prevent genocide complicity in atrocity crimes. So these are 3 recommendations that we included in the report.
Great. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Misa. It's been a really interesting conversation, and hopefully we'll continue to work together, and any further reports you publish, I'd love to have you on MEMO Conversation to discuss the work. Yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you at home for tuning in, and see you in another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nassim.
This was Middle East Monitor Conversations, brought to you by the Middle East Monitor in London.